And we're going to be looking into the days of Moses just a little bit this morning. And have you ever seen something just so crazy? And it's something so unbelievable that you just had to stop and stare? And we've been there, right? And there's a mailbox up here on First Street, on the east side of Main. There on First, right down here. There's this mailbox, and it's somebody made a mailbox holder for it. Okay, so it's a bunch of it looks like sucker rod or rebar. And they put rocks in it, right? And they use this rebar to create this cage for all the river rocks that they put in. And then they put the mailbox on top. It is the craziest thing. I think one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. And every time I drive by it, I stop and I stare at this. I don't know what it is. It's a piece of art or something with a mailbox on it. And I'm constantly looking at it because it's crazy. I'm trying to figure out what it is, right? Have you ever seen the rock art where they take a couple river rocks and they make a grasshopper or a ladybug or something out of it? Right? I keep looking at this mailbox holder expecting to see something come out of it, but I never do. It's just this crazy, unbelievable looking sculpture thing that I'm always trying to figure out, right? It's just so off the wall to me that it always grabs my attention. Always. I don't know that there's ever been a time where I didn't go by it and I didn't think, what is that? Right? I'm constantly trying to make something out of it. But the thing is it was so crazy to me that it caught my attention. Right? It was something that was so different and so offset compared to everything else around it that it jumps out at you. It grabs your attention. Well, in the text that we're going to be reading, we see that Moses is going to see something so crazy, so unbelievable, that he is compelled to go check it out. Right? And by doing so, it completely changed his life. Right? Before we get into that, though, I want to give you just a little background on Moses and bring you up to speed of where we're at in the story of Moses, right? Now, the people of Israel, or the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, during the time of Joseph, all went down to Egypt. There was a great famine where they were, right? And Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt. Now, if you know anything about the Old Testament, one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, was sold into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt, right? So when Jacob sends his sons down there to get food because Egypt has food, right? Well, that's where, long story short, they go back and forth a little bit. Joseph introduces himself, and as it was, the entire family moves to Egypt, right, to be with Joseph, and where they could be taken care of and have food and be profitable, right, and sustain, make a living, sustain life, right? So they all head down to Egypt, okay, and they're there for a while. And in fact, Moses is coming into the picture like 350 years after Joseph, right? So the Israelites have been in Egypt for a long time, right? And they're a lot. I mean, the whole mess up, right? And there gets to be so many that a new Pharaoh comes to order, right? And he's like, man, these Jews, way too many Jews. We got to do something about this, right? There's getting to be too many of them. They're too powerful. We're going to have to oppress them to keep them under wraps, keep them under our thumb, right? So they don't overtake us. Right? So they begin to force them into slavery. right? And the more they force them into slavery, the more profitable the Jewish people become. Right? The more they try to oppress them, the more the Jewish people just explode in prosperity and numbers. Right? And the Egyptians, they can't hold them down. Right? So it gets worse. And this new Pharaoh says, man, so tell you what we're going to do. And he sets this as a decree. He says, if you see an Israelite male that is born, you got to throw him in the river. Now, first he said this to the midwives, and they ignored him, right? So then he told the entire general populace of Egypt. He says, you see a Hebrew child that is a male, throw him in the river. We've got to get this under control. We got to nip this in the bud. Way too many Hebrews. And this is where the story of Moses picks up. Right? Moses was born during this time. The Bible tells us that Moses was born a beautiful child. And his mother hid him for 3 months. Have you ever tried to hide a baby? Have you ever think about that? You ever try to hide a baby? But it works good for like 30 seconds. Then wham! How? Not only a beautiful child, Moses must have been a quiet child. She hid him for 3 months. Right? It got to the point where she couldn't hide him anymore. Right? So they put him in a basket, a little wicker basket, shoved him down the Nile. Right? And they watched him. And it's amazing to me that never once did they think, oh no, Moses is going to die. Never once. They're like, yeah, we're going to put him in the basket, we're going to send him down the Nile, and we're going to watch and see where he goes. And that's what they did. They watched him. And Pharaoh's daughter picked him up out of the river. Pharaoh's daughter, right, saved him, drew him up out of the river. And then she turns around and gives him back to his mother. She says, here, will you take care of him for a while until he's old enough that, potty trained? I don't have to change diapers. You do that, I'll take him right? So that's what he did. So Moses was raised by his own mother. And then, somewhere around when he was done nursing, right? When he no longer needed that extra help from his mother, he was given back to Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses was raised in the house of Pharaoh as a prince. Right? I mean, he was a prince of Egypt. He had the privilege, the education, the wealth, the power, the ease of life. This is what Moses was raised into. But as Moses grew up, he saw the treatment of his people worsen. Right? I mean, when Moses was born, he was supposed to be killed. And as Moses grew over the next 40 years, the treatment of the Jews got worse and worse and worse. One day, I don't know if God was maybe working on Moses' heart a little bit, but Moses saw an Egyptian guard beating one of the Hebrews, one of his own people. And Moses was filled with anger and rage, and he attacked the Egyptian guard and killed him with his own hands. Killed him. And he probably would have got away with it, maybe. I don't know. But the next day, he goes back out and sees a couple of Hebrews fighting. And he tries to break it up. He said, man, you're brothers. What are you fighting for? And they look like, whoa, you're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And then at that point, Moses realized that what I did was secret. And that Pharaoh is going to be looking to punish me. So Moses takes off. Right? He's up and leaves. And he goes to the land of Midian. Yeah, that's kind of where they came from. Right? Over to Canaan, modern day Israel kind of side of things. And There, he meets a wife. He has some kids. Works for his father-in-law, right? Running his sheep operation. That's what Moses was doing for 40 years. Right? So Moses is 40 years old when he leaves Egypt, when he kills the guy and takes off. He's about 40 years old. Right? And from there, Moses is in the wilderness. Right? He's raising a family. He's tending some sheep. Right? For another 40 years. At this point, Moses is like 80 years old. And this is where we come into our text. And we're going to be reading Exodus 3, verses 1 through 6. If you want to follow along with me, verse 1, it says, Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire, and out of the midst of a bush he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. Then he said, Do not come near. Take off your sandals, or take the sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Now the first thing you're going to come see here is, Moses has seen fire before, right? I mean, he's 80 years old. He'd been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years. Moses has seen a wildfire. It's nothing new to him. And in fact, most generally, when Moses would see a wildfire, he'd probably stay away from it. Right? He sees something on fire, and he's like, well, we're not going to eat anything there today, right? And he takes the sheep somewhere else. So it wasn't a fire that actually grabbed his attention. Right? This fire was different. This fire was ablaze, but nothing was being consumed. Now, this would have been a crazy, crazy sight for Moses to see. When I read this, I think of a gas fireplace. Not one of the cheap ones that shoot a flame out the top of the log, but one that has logs layered and vents in different places. And when you first look at it, you've got to look twice to see if it's really wood or if it's not. Right? And we can see, you see the fire coming up through those fake logs, and you think that it ought to be burning, but it's not. See, it's not being consumed. You say, well, that may be somewhat of a common thing for us to see. For Moses, this was nuts. He never experienced anything like this, right? He's seen lots of fires. He knows how they act, right? It goes, whoa, the bush is gone. But this one, this bush just kept burning and kept burning and kept burning. Never, ever changing. So it grabs Moses' attention. Right? Verse 3, it says that Moses said, I will turn aside. And you think about it. Moses had to say it out loud. Moses said, I got to check this out. Right? I think that's how it went. First of all, he stared at it. Right? I mean, if you see something that crazy, you're going to stop and you're going to stare at it. I think Moses was just staring at it. Looking at it. Kind of trying to figure out what it was. You see, he wanted to make sure he wasn't going crazy. I mean, when you see something unbelievable, you have to stop to make sure. Right? You have to stop and say, am I really seeing this? So Moses checks it out. And he had to decide whether or not it was worth the trouble. Right? We talked that this is something completely crazy. Most of the time when there's a fire, Moses is going to go the other way. He's got a bunch of sheep to take care of and feed. Fire has nothing to do with that. Right? So Moses, first of all, he had to see this crazy bush burning all by itself. And once he decided that he wasn't crazy and he was actually seeing it, he had to decide whether it was worth his time to go check out this bush. Right? Because most of the time, it looks dangerous. It looks scary. We don't know what to do with it. Moses had to be thinking, man, this may not be good. I would be thinking that. Right? Man, this may not be something I want to go check out. You've been there though, right? You've avoided things that you just knew probably weren't going to work out the way you wanted to. It's going to be a little stressful for you, right? Maybe you see that person standing across the parking lot waving at you, and you're just like, if I just keep going, they won't even know I saw them. I don't have time to deal with that mess right now. Right? We avoid things that kind of interrupt our lives. This was a bigger interruption to Moses. It was this huge bush. He had to figure out, am I going to take the time? Do I want to hassle with this? Do I want to mess with it? It messes with my time. It's going to mess with my life. Moses was old. He was content with where he was. He wasn't looking for a new adventure. He certainly wasn't looking for a trip back to Egypt. That's where God was going to send him. You see, what we see here is God trying to get Moses' attention. Just like that person across the parking lot waving at you going, hey! Trying to get your attention. God is getting Moses' attention here. I don't think Moses wanted his attention to be God. He's an 80-year-old man. He's got the demands of a wife, 2 kids, a job. Right? And on top of that, here you have Moses. He's packing around some unresolved anger issues from killing a guy. Right? Just the burden of being a murderer. It's going to weigh on you, right? Moses is not looking for a new assignment from God. He's just looking to ride out what he's got going. So for him to turn and see this bush and actually decide to pursue it, to decide to force his life in, to change his life. But it didn't matter to God. You see, it didn't matter that Moses was 80 years old. It didn't matter that he killed somebody. It didn't matter that he had anger issues. Moses, God was trying to get Moses' attention. You see, like Moses, he tries to get your attention. And he always tries the easy way first. You ever notice that? God never goes for the burning bush right off the bat, I don't think. He always tries the easy way. Right? He tries to get your attention through your Sunday school teacher, through your friend, through your neighbor, maybe a family member. Right? Maybe it was your parents that led you to Jesus. Maybe it was your parents that was your burning bush. What an amazing gift that would be. You think about that? That he is constantly trying to get your attention. He is constantly throwing these little burning bushes out there for you to grab your attention. And he uses the people in our lives, in the events in our lives, to grab our attention. He gives us countless opportunity. And he keeps trying. I think of the Apostle Paul, right? Here's the Apostle Paul is an amazing story of how God gave him every single opportunity. You think about it. The Apostle Paul was raised in the Scripture. He studied with the best teachers, right? He practiced God's law. The Apostle Paul was given the best of what was to offer. You see, he was given the training and the knowledge. He was given the Scriptures. Jesus was revealed to the Apostle Paul in the Scriptures. He didn't realize it, but it was there. God was constantly trying to get his attention. Constantly trying to get his attention. Jesus was revealed to him in the Scriptures. Jesus was revealed to him in person. You know, Paul was alive when Jesus was crucified. He was revealed to him in spirit. When Paul was standing there, listening to Stephen preach right before they stoned him to death, Jesus was revealed to him. Opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. It was burning bush after burning bush after burning bush. Now, the Apostle Paul had to be blinded and knocked off his horse. Just think about that. Before God could get Paul's attention, he was blinded and knocked off his horse. That's how God, that was his burning bush. You see, unfortunately, it's too often, like Paul, our lives have to be seriously disrupted for us to even look to God. Some of us were brought pretty low before we would acknowledge our need for Him, weren't we? I was. You see, I couldn't see my burning bush past my pride and my arrogance. And in fact, for me, it took a forest fire. Right? Instead of a burning bush, it got to the point where my life was so messed up. It got to a point where God seriously disrupted my life. It was more than a burning bush. It was a forest fire. And let me tell you, if you hear the call of God this morning, if you see a burning bush, don't ignore it. Don't let it get to the point where He's got to send a forest fire to get your attention. Because chances are you're just going to run from the forest fire just like you ran from the bush. If you hear the call of God this morning, if you know God's trying to get your attention, don't turn away from Him. He's a consistent God. He'll keep trying. But the more you turn away from Him, the more you ignore Him, the easier it gets. You know, as believers, you might be somebody else's burning bush. I mean, that's what you don't understand sometimes is, as believers, we have to keep in mind that if we profess Christ as our Lord and Savior, somebody's watching you. Your life reveals your God to others. Kind of makes you wonder, what God am I revealing? I mean, it's something to think about. Am I revealing the one true God through my life, or am I just revealing the God of this world? Can He use you as a burning bush for somebody else today? Now that God has Moses' attention, He's going to take it to the next step. Right? He calls him. He says, Moses, Moses. He calls his name. You see, after God has your attention, He calls for you. Once you turn aside to look upon Him, He calls your name. He calls you to enter into service to Him, to live your life for Him, to do His will, to enter into His eternal life. You see, that's how He works. Jesus used the same process. Right? With Jesus, you have John the Baptist. He's raising people's attention. He's getting people's attention. Then you have the baptism of Jesus. That got people's attention. Right? People started looking at who's this Jesus guy? Jesus' teaching and Jesus' miracles got people's attention. And then Jesus called. He says, follow me. Come. When He has your attention, He calls. He says, take my life. Take my cross. And we have to decide what to do with this invitation. You see, Moses had a decision to make. First of all, he says, am I really going to talk to this bush? I mean, I've never had a bush talk to me. I would have to stop and think, am I really going to talk to this bush? Am I really going to commit to going down this path? That's the decision that he had to make. That's the decision we have to make. You see, it can seem to us that following Christ is crazy. That answering His call is craziness. That is something that we would never consider doing. He may be calling you and asking you to go somewhere and do something that is way beyond you. It seems like craziness. And you have to consider, am I really going to go down this path? In 2012, I had filled in. My very first time I filled in for Sunday school teacher. They asked me a couple weeks before, they knew they were going to be gone. They said, hey, can you fill in for me? I said, sure. I'd like to give that a try. Right? God was working on me. I was in my Bible, studying. I'm loving it. I'm growing. I'm like, wow, what an opportunity. I could teach a Sunday school class. Right? I got done that Sunday, and I taught Sunday school, and we had church service, and after church service, we were getting ready to go home, and I turned to my wife, and I said, I think I have to be a pastor. My wife thought I was nuts. And in fact, she still might. I thought I was nuts. I grew up a pastor's kid, a preacher's kid. I'd seen I'd seen hard things in a church. I'd seen the way my dad, it was a very, very small church. Right? I seen my dad work full time at a job and then work full time at the church. I saw that he was exhausted and he was tired. I saw politics in the church, which I didn't like growing up. I saw all this stuff in the church, and I can promise you that being a pastor was the farthest thing from my career opportunities that I had in mind. Right? Never even crossed my mind until that day in 2012. Where I knew in my heart of hearts that God had called me to be a pastor. It seemed like I didn't want to. It wasn't something that I had fashioned out for myself. But it was a call from God. And it was not what I wanted to do. At least not at first. It was scary. But no matter how scary it was, I had to make that decision. I had to decide, am I going to commit to going down this path? You see, we either have to stand in faith that God will prepare us for what He has called us for, or we will run in fear of the change that it will bring to our lives. You're either going to stand in faith or you're going to run in fear. Those are really the only two options. You see, I knew 6 years ago that if I was ever going to be standing in this place, that I had to give all my control over to Him. Right? That I couldn't fear the things that I couldn't control. But if I had to make that decision to answer the call. Do you fear what living for Him would mean for your life this morning? I mean, are you afraid to answer His call? Because it would mean change, maybe loss of control. It would mean getting out of your comfort zone. Dying to ourselves and to our own wills. I mean, really, that's what we're the most scared of, isn't it? I mean, can we just be honest with each other for a second? I mean, we reject His calling and His invitation because we fear the sacrifice. We fear the pain that is associated with dying to ourselves. We fear dying to ourselves and walking in newness of life. This world, that our pride, our sin can have such a grip on us that we become so comfortable that we fear what life would be like in the freedom of God's will. And we choose to ignore it. And we remain ignorant to the wonders that He has in store for us. All because we're too afraid to answer a call. You see, the events of Moses' life and the time that he spent in the wilderness, it prepared him to answer God's call. And when God called, Moses answered, "Here I am." Here I am. You see, God has brought you to this point. You are sitting here today. And He is calling you into a deeper relationship with Him. And He's looking for those who will say, "Here I am. Here I am." That was Moses' answer. And here I am is the answer of someone who is willing to walk with God. They're willing to put the old self to death and walk in the will of God. You see, when God asked, "Who will I send? Who will go for me?" The prophet Isaiah said, "Here I am, send me." He was willing to walk with God and not with the world. Right? When God needed somebody to build a boat on dry land because a flood was coming, a flood that nobody knew had ever seen before, dry land. He says, "I need somebody to build a boat on dry land." Noah said, "Here I am. I'll do it." Right? When a 9-foot-tall giant had the armies of Israel scared to fight, God called a teenager to face him. A teenager. And when God called that teenager, David said, hey, I'll go. Here I am. Here I am is the answer to God's call. God is calling out and He is seeking men and women who will reject the ways of this world, who will repent of their sin and choose to answer the call of righteousness, to enter into His service. And the question is, will you answer the call? How will you answer the call? Will you declare that no matter the circumstances, no matter the fear, no matter the pain, regardless of any discomfort, humiliation, or persecution, I will serve the Lord? Is that the answer to your call? That's the answer He's looking for. Now Moses answered that call, right? Moses says, here I am. First of all, I probably said, whoa, this bush knows my name. Just kidding. First of all, it burns and then it talks to me. This is a crazy thing. He says, this bush knows my name. I'm going to answer the call. And then Moses says, I got to check this out, right? And he starts walking up to that bush. God stops him. He says, whoa. And He reveals His holiness to him. I mean, judging from his reaction in verse 6, I believe that Moses knew of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Right? It says there in verse 6 that when God revealed who He was, He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. He knew who this God was. In fact, I mean, we've already talked about it. The Israelites were a huge population, right? And they would have had Moses would have had some understanding of the God of his ancestors, right? Even though he was raised in Pharaoh's house, he would have had some idea of the history of his people. We know that he cared for his people. Not only that, but Jethro, his father-in-law, priest of Midian. Now, I did a lot of research on this. What is a priest of Midian? I wanted to know, what did the Midianites believe? I found out that later on, that the Midianites were actually kind of leading the Israelites astray. Right? But Jethro is a priest of Midian. And I started doing some looking into Jethro and what it is to be a priest of Midian. You get to Exodus chapter 18, and it reveals to us that Jethro is serving the one true God. I thought that was amazing. That God led Moses somewhere where he could be influenced by God. It is truly that he would have been learning about God, maybe from his father-in-law. Right now, I'll tell you where I came from all this. Not only Exodus chapter 18, but the Midianites were direct descendants of Abraham. Abraham's second wife, Keturah, after Sarah died, formed the Midianites. They never left. They were Abraham's descendants. And people were living 150, 200 years old back then. Can you imagine that Keturah could have actually been alive when Moses was born? It was possible. I mean, but we're only like 2 generations removed from Abraham. And it's very possible that Moses was in a situation where he was learning about God from his father-in-law. Now, I bring that up because the Old Testament is mainly this history of God's interaction with the Hebrew people. But see, even in the Old Testament, we see the proof that God is God over all people. Even back then, God was God over all people, not just the Jews. There's this amazing story, and it reveals to us how God just constantly worked on Moses to prepare him to answer that call. I want to tell you this morning that God has been working on you and in your life, and He has placed you in a position to answer His call. I pray you answer His call this morning. The last thing in this passage that we're going to take a look at is after he answers the call and he goes to check out the bush, God stops him, right? And He tells him, this is holy ground. Remove your sandals. Remove your sandals. The first thing that pops into my head here is that in God's presence, even the ground is holy. I mean, God is so holy, so morally perfect, that in His presence, even the ground is holy. His holiness radiates out from Him. Now, to take off His sandals. Now, this may seem to be a stranger question, or it's even a command, isn't it? He tells them, take off your shoes. You're in my presence. Take off your shoes. Right? Now, really this command, as I see it, is threefold. Right? The first is that it's a sign of reverence or respect. Right? Joshua was told to do the same thing. When he saw the angel of the Lord, he approached the angel of the Lord looked at him and said, take off your shoes. It's holy ground. Right? It's a sign of reverence or respect to our God. Even in Jesus' day, right? It was respectful of someone to remove their shoes and wash their feet before they entered a house. Just like removing a hat. Right? We all walked in the building today, or at some point, a lot of us took our hats off. I usually leave mine on until I pray. But it was customary, especially in the generations before me, to take your hat off when you walked into a house. In fact, my grandfather told me many times, take your hat off, don't disrespect your grandmother that way. I have no idea how my hat disrespected my grandmother, but taking your hat off was a sign of respect in our culture, right? So in the same way, taking your shoes off in their culture was a way of paying respect or paying their reverence to God. Now here's the question. You may have removed your hat when you walked into this building as a sign of respect and maybe reverence for God, right? But do you have that same reverence for God at your work? Do you have that same reverence for God in your house? Do you have that same reverence for God in your car? When you're all alone, jamming out to the radio, do you have the same reverence for God there as you do here? You see, the presence of God is always with us. He is everywhere. That kind of makes it everywhere we go holy ground. Do we have a reverence for God? Is it shown in the way that we live. Not just at church, but everywhere else. The second thing is taking your sandals off. It serves as a warning. A warning. You see, I don't know about you, but when I take my shoes off and go outside and walking around with my shoes off, I have to really watch my step. Right? There's rocks, there's stickers, you're constantly watching where you're walking. You're watching your step. You don't want to step on something bad. I want to read a passage to you, a verse out of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, verse 1. It says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know they are doing evil. Then he says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. He's telling us, don't take the presence of God for granted. Right? God is holy, and we need to be mindful and respectful of His holiness. We don't serve Him or worship Him carelessly. But we acknowledge His greatness, and we humble ourselves before Him. We come prepared to honor God, to hear from Him, and then to act on what we've learned. We need to watch our step. Take your shoes off. The third, finally, is that it serves as an invitation. You see, when you take your shoes off, you aren't looking to run off. When I get up and get going in the morning, before I walk out of the house, I put my boots on. Now, my boots usually stay on until I am absolutely done for the day. Right? No, my wife's not the same. She likes barefoot, and for some reason only puts her shoes on when she has to. But, you see, my boots don't come off until I am done. Right? When my boots come off, I am looking to sit, relax. It means I'm going to stay where I'm at for a while. Right? I'm not going to be running in and out. I took my boots off. I'm going to stay. God is not calling us into a fly-by-night or a come-and-go relationship. He says, take your shoes off and stay a while. Get comfortable in His presence. You see, He's inviting us to reside in His holiness. In fact, God's calling you today. I hope you realize that. It's not a matter of if He is trying to call you. He's trying to get a hold of you. He is calling you today. Right? Maybe it's in the form of a burning bush. He's trying to get your attention, so He can introduce Himself, offer you a new life. Maybe He's just calling your name. He's calling you to serve. Are you hearing His question this morning? Do you hear Him calling, saying, who will go? Is He calling your name? Maybe He's just calling you to spend some time in His presence. To maybe acknowledge His greatness. Maybe He's calling you to maybe revere or rely on Him a little bit more. To rely on His holiness. To walk into His presence like you've never been before. Folks, He's calling you today. He's calling you to take the life of Christ and the gift that we have been given seriously. We have been called to walk on holy ground. And the question before each and every one of us today is, how will you answer the call? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. Lord God, I thank you this morning that you are God that does not give up on us. Lord, I thank you that you will always be calling us deeper and deeper into relationship with you, deeper into your presence. Lord, I pray that you would just, oh Lord, that you would enable us to answer that call. Lord, that we would not run in fear. Lord, but that we would stand in faith and answer your call. We don't always ask, but I don't want to let the opportunity slip up. If you have never answered God's call to walk in the newness of life, to receive the gift of Jesus Christ, if you've never answered that call and you feel it this morning, please just lift up a hand and say, yes, here I am, send me. Maybe you've been ignoring a calling that God has placed on your life. Now I pray this morning that He would empower you to answer that call, that He would empower you to put the fear aside and say, yes, Lord, here I am. Here I am. Oh, Lord, I know that you are calling each and every one of us to be closer to you in one way, form, or another. Oh God, I pray that you would just soften our hearts. That when we hear that call, Lord, that you would prepare us, that we would be ready to declare, here I am. Send me. Father, I pray that you would just touch each and every person here today. Lord, that you would uplift them. Lord, that you would empower them to be bold in their faith, to stand in their faith, regardless of what may come. Lord, that we would be all in for you. Lord, bless each and every heart here today. In Jesus' name, amen. And thank you all for coming out this morning. Before you leave today, get a hold of somebody. Tell them you're going to be praying for them this week. And do it. God bless.
Just in Arizona too. Is it open now? They were in the kitchen. There were people standing outside this morning when they start I tried there first. It's clean as
Oh, we're still waiting It's mine. Mine's the same as another, so. Yeah,
Okay, well, I hope they didn't change it. They just had it.
looks like it's gonna be good.
You know, they had it last week.
I hope so.
I asked her that. I said, I'd like to smoke both. No, she said they have to let everybody else in their room go on. So I'm ready to expect it. Yeah. And then I would, if you find out something different, I would get the way she's controlling If you find out something, let me know.
Ready? We'll see you later. See you tomorrow. We're meeting at 5.
Yeah, but this, and that's what I was notified, but she said, then I just let it down when I got the answers that way. And then she has to expect the votes. Okay, that's
Okay. All right, give me a call, let me know. How are you doing? All right.
I think she's trying to manipulate
Oh, great. Take it back. She knows more than I do.
call them Mesa, but they'll breed good enough to baby. So how are they doing over there? They grow fits and want you to feed them all the time and just stay there with them? Thank you, Joanne. I think that they're probably
Rockies fans, check out the Rockies Double Play Deal at Papa John's. All season long, enjoy 2 large up to 5 topping or specialty pizzas for just $11 each. Courtesy of your Colorado Rockies. Just use promo code LX11 at PapaJohns.com. It's 2 large up to 5 topping or specialty pizzas for just $11 each with promo code ROX11 at PapaJohns.com. Better ingredients, better pizza. Papa John's. Proud sponsor of your Colorado Rockies.
A Sport Clips Championship haircut experience makes you feel like your hair has its own walk-up music. Maybe you play sports. Maybe you play sports online. Or maybe your sport is keeping up with your kids. Your hair deserves its own walk-up music, and at Sport Clips, we make music. A game-changing cut from a stylist trained for guys while you're surrounded by sports. Hair this good needs no introduction, but you'll want one anyway. So get in line online at sportclips.com/check-in and get your hair in the game.
Has a lot of fame. Because the deal that you can say, the sport nuggets is more.
For those Okay, self-control.
One sandwich or all that? The way you
See that right here.
Now that's delicious.
It's